Hi there, my name is Memo, this is my channel, Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see some of it behind me, it's tropical houseplants. So today I'm going to continue with the plant review series, and as always what I'll try to do is put chapters down below on the video, so if you want to see a specific section, just skip over to that. But as always, some groundwork. These are my opinions based on my environment with my plant, giving them the care that I give these plants. And yeah, it's going to be biased to me essentially. But as with all of these reviews, if you've got these plants and you want to share your experiences, please do in the comments down below, because it will hopefully help other people when they're thinking about getting this. Now the plant I want to be talking about today is the one right in front of me, and I'll bring it in a bit closer and you might be able to see. This is the Piper Sylvaticum basically, and you can see there's a little pouch because of spider mites, this one. But we'll touch on that in just a moment. But yes, the Piper Sylvaticum. So let's dive into the first topic, which is background. So the background on this one is kind of interesting. So when I got this plant, and I'll bring it in a bit closer so you might be able to see, there you go. And as always with the background section, I'll add a picture here from my plant care app to see what it was like when I first got it. And I'm not going to lie, this plant was a decent plant in a pot basically. It wasn't tiny by any stretch of the imagination. I lucked out. I found it at a local plant store, which was great. And I was able to kind of go and experience this plant up close before I picked it up, basically. I also had a selection that I could choose from. It wasn't just the one. There was, I think, 4 or 5 plants there, and I just went, ooh, that one. Which is always better if you can do it. But the one thing that I will say about this plant is I didn't know an awful lot about it when I first got it. I've never had a Piper before, and I don't have another one other than this. I think there's one that's the Propagation or something along those lines, which is slightly more pinkish leaves. And I would love to get my hands on that now that I've had this. But the other thing as well, not only did I not know an awful lot about this plant, but there also, even after I got it, there wasn't an awful lot written online from what this research that I was doing back when I first bought it. And the title of the video will say how long I've had this plant. I think it's probably about a year and a half now, year and a half. So not one of the plants that I've had as long as some of the others, but I've had it for long enough now that I can at least talk a bit more confidently on some of the things that I have seen for this plant. And in terms of care, you might be able to see that it's in a plastic pot. I do have it in my usual aroid soil mix. Interestingly, with this plant, it's one that I haven't really repotted from its original soil. So I did eventually up-pot it at some point, use some of my usual aroid soil mix, and I'll put a link up at the top there if you ever wanted to see what my aroid soil mix is like. But I used that around the soil and just put it in a bigger pot, basically. So the original soil that came from the grower is still within this plant. And the reason for that, and hopefully a lot of other people will do the same thing, is if you really don't know an awful lot about the plant and there's not an awful lot of things written about it, why mess with something that the grower has used? Because they've probably had a lot more experience than you or me have had with this plant. So go with what they have. Granted, I know, and I've talked about this on other videos, that's not always the best thing to do, but with this one, it worked like a charm, basically. But yeah, I bought it from the plant store. I didn't know an awful lot about it. I learned a lot of things since then, which I will share in this video. But yeah, I don't even think it had a support or anything like that. It was just a trailing plant when I first got it. But in terms of kind of what the experience was in terms of finding it, it wasn't that bad. I'll touch a bit more about that in the availability section. But yeah, a very, very, very cool plant. Something that a lot of people might not know about this plant as well. Pipers are part of the Piper family, basically. And if I'm not mistaken, it's also the same part of the family where it's related to peppers. If you're anything like me, and maybe I'm just showing my kind of stupidity on this video with this one, I thought when I heard pepper, I was thinking, oh, bell peppers and like chili peppers and all these things. And I was like, oh, that's odd little thing to be for like a house plant. Yeah, no, not peppers, not those peppers. Peppers as in peppercorns. And also because of that, it comes from a similar region of the world that you will get peppercorn plants, and that will kind of give you a bit of an indication. Definitely an interesting one for you to do some of your own research to see where it originates from. This is one of the plants I was recently on the Ledge podcast with Jane Perrone, which I've been a fan of for many, many years. So I was fangirling like you cannot believe. But this was one of the plants that we talked about on that episode. And it's an interesting one because, again, not a lot of people know about it, not a lot of people are aware of it, and it's still one of those plants, basically. But I think I've prattled enough about background. Let's move on to the next topic. So the next topic that I want to talk about is speed of growth, as always. Now, this one was a really interesting one because the leaves, and I'll bring it up so you can see one of the leaves, and I'll do the usual thing that I've started doing now, which is put a B-roll at the end of the video so you can kind of look at some of these things a bit more clearly, and I'll show you the backs of the leaves as well. And you can see the vines there as well, and hopefully that might be getting picked up. But the leaves are actually kind of stiff, and they've got this slight corrugation on them in terms of how they look. There's kind of undulations to the leaf. Very, very similar if you've got a Monstera sparperu, or I think it's also called the Monstera carstenianum. I bought it as the, I think in Europe it's also being sold as the Epipremnum Golden Planet, I think, or something like that, or Green Planet. I can't remember now. It's definitely not an Epipremnum. It's definitely a Monstera, the one that I'm talking about. But it's got very similar leaves to that. So if you've got a Monstera sparperu, or you've seen one, it's got very similar kind of texture to those leaves like that. They're kind of quite stiff leaves, and the way that it vines, and I'll show you that there, and obviously it's a vining / trailing plant. And I've not been able to find an awful lot of pictures of this in nature. To be fair, I only did that research when I was first getting it. There might be a bit more now. But the speed of growth for this, I didn't know an awful lot going into it. I can say now, after how long of me having it, and you might be able to see there are 2 support sticks, support stick crew for the win, and I keep wrapping the kind of long tendrils around and around and around. I think it's probably wrapped about 6 or 7 times around now. So it is, if I'd let it trail down, it'd be a very, very long plant at this point. It grows quite fast. At least that's been my experience with this. This is possibly one of my fastest growing plants. I would almost relate this to a golden pothos in terms of how quickly it grows. So again, as I always do on these things, if I compare it to a golden pothos, and a golden pothos in the summer might bring out 2 or 3 leaves in my conservatory environments, this will pretty much do the same thing. So a very, very fast grower. At least it has been in my experience. As always, if your experience has been different, do let me know down below. But yeah, very, very fast grower and consistent grower as well. So it will also grow relatively fast, even in the winter months. Not to the same level that it will do in spring and summer, but it still consistently will grow quite nicely even during those colder months. Moving on to ease of propagation with this one. And I haven't personally propagated this, but I do have a friend that propagated a cutting that I gave her in a plant swap a year ago now, actually. So I can talk from her experiences. And if I'm not mistaken, she propagated it in a prop box with moss, if I'm not mistaken. And it did really well, and it rooted out quite interestingly. The thing with this, and this is the thing that I find quite interesting is, and I'll see if I can maybe do it in the B-roll so you can actually see a bit closer. The nodes, the actual aerial roots aren't particularly substantial, and they harden off really, really quickly, basically. And it's an interesting one because even though it's a trailing slash vining plant, it doesn't exhibit the qualities that you might be used to with maybe some of the aroids that we all kind of know. So if you give it a plank, I don't think this was attached. Haven't tried it, but based on how it's growing, I don't think it would. It's different than a Hoya, that Hoya will bring out those growth points in the tendrils and then wrap around something to kind of give it some stability. It won't attach with aerial roots as far as I can tell. So all I've been doing is just wrapping it around the support sticks. So if you've grown this in a different way, do let me know, because I'd be really curious. So I was a bit iffy and kind of going, how is this going to propagate? Is it going to propagate relatively easily? Based on my friend's experiences, yes, it was a relatively easy plant to propagate. So definitely one to at least attempt to do it. And obviously, because it grows as quickly as it does, even if you don't have a bushy plant to begin with, you can probably get a bushy plant relatively quickly by just taking some cuttings as the vines are growing long and kind of rooting them out and putting them back in the pot, and then you'll get an even bushier plant as well. So definitely one that will propagate quite easily. As I said, I've only ever had stories told to me. I haven't even tried this, and I should probably try to propagate this. I've got too many propagates already, and I've got too many plants. I don't know if I want to necessarily cut it to make more plants. I might do, because I'm starting to go to a few more plant swaps, and hopefully if there's going to be a few more happening, this might be an interesting one to take to a plant swap. Talking about availability with this one, I touched on it briefly. When I got this plant, it wasn't something that you saw an awful lot of. So there wasn't an awful lot of these that were around. Similar to what happened with a lot of plants is that, at least here in the UK, and I'm assuming it might be the same in Europe, we did get an influx of this coming in from probably some Dutch nurseries or some nurseries in the Netherlands, basically. And there was a bit of an influx that came in. I haven't seen them crop up as often since then, which I think is a crying shame, because for me at least, this has been quite an easy plant to take care of. Now, I will caveat that slightly and say I have only ever grown it in my conservatory. So there's decent lighting, there's definitely a decent level of humidity in here. So I don't know how this would be in a household environment. Please, if you do grow this and you grow this in a household environment with regular household humidity, do drop a comment down below. I would be very interested to know, and I'm sure some of the people watching this will probably also be interested to know what it's like. Because I know that crocatum one, the other one that's slightly more pinkish, from everything I've seen, it will only grow in a terrarium environment because it needs that high level of humidity. Now, as I said, I don't know because I've grown it in here, but I don't think this one would be quite as fussy. Interestingly enough, you see a lot more of that one online, the crocatum one. I don't think that's any more available than this one is, but you don't see an awful lot of this, and I think this is easier based on just my experience with this plant. As I said, I don't have the other one, so I can't tell you 100%, but this has been a relatively simple plant to take care of, and it's not been a prima donna in any way or form. But as I was saying, there wasn't an awful lot that come out. There was an influx from them again, not that many, but there was an influx that came in. Not seen it that often since then. I think this was mid to high double digits when I got it. Probably closer to the mids, actually. It wasn't even that expensive for a relatively decent sized plant, at least here. And yeah, I think definitely worth the money. I've paid more money than that for some other plants and have not grown anywhere near as quickly or consistently as I have done with this one. Now, looking at it recently, I don't think the prices have changed too much, and the availability is kind of the same. You can occasionally see this crop up. I think I've seen this come up as cuttings, maybe on eBay, or slightly more established plants as well, but it's not one that you see all the time. And the reality with this one is, I think because it's a Piper, and because not a lot of people are aware of Pipers, and because people know of the kind of bad rap that the other Piper the crocatum or crocatum. I am probably butchering that name, and I do apologize, especially if you've got one of those. But I think that one got a lot of the limelight, and this one was kind of left in its dust a bit. But it's a shame because it is a very cool plant, and as I discovered when I was doing the research before going on to the On the Ledge podcast with Jane Perrone, the Pipers, and this one specifically, has been around since the 70s or 80s. Granted, it was hard to get hold of it even back then, but I truly think it's probably because not an awful lot of people know about this plant or know about Pipers in general. They're not kind of as much of a household name as something like a Monstera or some of the other aroids might be. So that's my 2 cents on that one. But yeah, availability, tricky to come by sometimes, not crazy expensive. But yeah, I mean, you could potentially come across this on occasion, probably maybe on some online sellers and more kind of specialty, smaller plant stores. Moving on to the topic of pests. Everybody's favorite topic. You saw that there is the little satchel for the spider mites, and I will say with this one, I have seen mealybugs on it, and again, people that have been here for a while, I'm sorry, I keep mentioning mealybugs, but I'm still dealing with mealybugs, so. But occasionally get some mealybugs, nothing that goes crazy with this one, and spider mites once or twice in the summer, and I think I just kind of gave it the satchel, and this is from last year, I probably need to throw it away to be fair. But I put it on there mainly, so I think it was close to another plant that had spider mites, mainly as a preventative rather than dealing with spider mites, if that makes sense. The other thing that I will say with this plant that a lot of people will worry about, and if I bring it in a bit closer, it hopefully will pick up. You might be able to see some black dots, and I'll see if I can get that on the B-roll as well so you can see it. Maybe this leaf might be a better one actually to show you with, and you might be able to see some of that speckling of the leaf there, and you might be able to see some little black dots. This plant is a plant that will get extrafloral nectaries a lot, usually on the underside of the foliage. And I'm hoping and this is the thing, I do need to kind of look at this and kind of go, I think I did an extrafloral nectaries video. I'm not sure if I did it here or on my Instagram. If I have done it here, I'll see if I can link it up the top there and you can find out a bit more about that. But extrafloral nectaries is essentially where the plant secretes this sugary substance on the leaves or on the stems. And it's essentially to attract things like ants because they like the sugariness that's coming out of the plant. And then the ants end up protecting this plant from other pests. But this is a plant that, and the friend that I was mentioning that got the cutting and propagator, she was a bit worried and going, it's this pest. And I'm just like, no, it's normal. And the thing with a lot of the extrafloral nectaries, sometimes you'll see it as a clear kind of syrupy substance on the plant. So you can kind of notice it quite easily when you know what it is. With this one, it turns black. So that's the slight blackness that you get there, and the kind of, there's a slightly, if you ran your fingers under it, you get slightly gritty, like it's sand almost. It's really, really small, but it goes black. I'm assuming it's because some part of whatever chemical is in this specific plant's extrafloral nectaries is oxidizing with the air and turning black. So it's not a pest. There's not nothing to worry about necessarily. If you are worried that it is a pest, however, think that it might be extrafloral nectaries first, but obviously always a good idea to have something like a jeweler's loupe or a magnifying glass, or even your camera on your phone camera at a magnification to just zoom in and just double check that it isn't pest. But a lot of the times with this plant, it just tends to be the extrafloral nectaries, and if you don't know about it, it will freak you out. It did with me the first time I saw it on this plant, because I don't think I've got any other plant that will exhibit it in this way, if that makes sense. The blackness that happens, and because it's so small and minute, it very easily could be like, is this a pest? What is happening? But yeah, generally not an awful lot of pest pressures on this plant. Moving on to accessories for this, and obviously you might be able to see I am going to talk about support sticks with this. As I've mentioned, With this, it's more that I'm wrapping it so it's not trailing down. You could have it trailing down. A lot of the times when I've left the vines to kind of trail like this, they do start very similar to an anthurium. They will start with very, very small foliage and they kind of swell and get bigger as they go along. I'm pretty sure with this one, even some of my trailing vines, the leaves do still get relatively large. It just takes a while basically for the leaf to come in. But as I said, consistent grower, so you'll constantly get the things. But yeah, so the support sticks, you can if you want to have it upright or you can have it trailing. That's absolutely fine as well. As I've mentioned, I don't know because I haven't tried it on a moss pole and haven't tried it on a plank. I don't know if that would work or if it would make any difference whatsoever. Arrowed soil mix, I was mentioning before, I do fertilize this relatively frequently, even in the winter. I think every second or third watering, this gets a very light fertilizer. And the one thing I will say about this, and this wasn't talked about enough when I was doing my research, I found this plant doesn't like to go fully dry in terms of its soil. So I always try to water it just before it goes fully dry, basically. And it's been super happy. Interestingly enough, with the slightly harder leaves, you would assume that it'd be okay going drier, but I don't think it liked it when I let it happen, basically, a few times. So that's how I've been dealing with this. But other than that, no kind of real major accessories that you would need specifically for this plant that you wouldn't hopefully already have somewhere that you use, like sticks or moss poles or anything like that. So nothing kind of crazy to break the bank there. So moving on to final thoughts with this plant, and I'll do what I usually do with most of these reviews and give a score from, actually no, before we do the scoring, let's talk about knowing what I know now about this plant, and if I didn't have it in my care, would I buy it? 100%. No brainer, basically. It's been a super easy plant to take care of, at least it has been in my experience. And I would definitely get this again. The more worrying bit was when I was first looking into this plant and I couldn't find an awful lot of information. But hopefully, if you've got enough plants in your collection and you've been doing this for a while, trust yourself that you have gained enough experience over the years caring with plants and seeing what plants have similar kind of care needs and all these things, that you should be able to deduce when you get a plant like this that you might have not been able to find an awful lot of information online or when you're doing your research. You should be able to deduce and just kind of go, I can make an assumption that this is probably what it's going to need based on the foliage or based on the way that it grows, and give that a try. And if it doesn't work, you can always try something different. But definitely one that I would get again. Fast grower, consistent grower, and very interesting to look at. The other thing that I will mention about this plant, and let me pick it up again, is so there's a silveriness to the foliage. What also does happen, which is kind of cool with this one, it's less permanent. I think on the crocatum, I think it might be more permanent. You get a very cool kind of peachy pink blush on the silvery part of the leaves. Usually when it's newer leaves and usually when it's exposed to higher light levels, so usually in the summertime, you'll get a lot more of that. And it is very cool, it's very exciting. But coming on to the scoring, 0 being the worst, 10 being the best, what score would I give this? I would probably give this a strong 8 or a 9 actually, purely because not an awful lot of problems, consistent grower, fast grower, what's not to like basically, very unusual foliage as well, the way that it is, and the silveriness and the blushing that happens. All of these things make for me a really cool, interesting and unusual house plant. And it's also not, I don't think it's an aroid, I will correct myself here if it is, but it's not the usual Monstera, Philodendron, Anthurium. And I know I've heard a lot of you that made comments and saying, can we have a review on something that isn't an aroid? And I'm trying to see things in my collections that might be something that people want to review on and isn't a plant that absolutely everybody else has that would be good enough for review, and I'm struggling a bit now. But if I can find something, I will add that in there. If you've got specific genuses that you would like to see a bit more, would you like to see more Hoyas maybe, or begonias or anything like that, do let me know in the comments down below and I can include it in future videos. But yeah, I think that's everything I wanted to say about the Piper Sylvaticum. Hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon. And I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.